Coyote Gulch, Texas Panhandle, late spring 1869. Esther Prescott stood on the porch of the Triple Bar Ranch house, staring at the bundle in her arms that had appeared on her doorstep at dawn, with nothing but a scrawled note. The baby girl, maybe 3 months old, slept peacefully wrapped in a worn quilt, oblivious to the fact that her mother had left her here with only 5 words. Take care of her, please. The ranch was barely holding together until spring roundup. The hands were gone to the southern pastures, and Esther's job as railroad clerk in town paid just enough to keep the mortgage current. But a baby changed everything. She had no milk, no cradle, no idea how to keep an infant alive through the next week, let alone until her brother returned from the cattle drive. The note gave no name, no explanation, just a desperate mother's last hope. And Esther felt her heart crack open in a way she had kept locked since her parents died in the cholera outbreak 5 years back. She had learned not to trust, not to let anyone close, because loss was the only certainty in this hard country. But the tiny fist curled against the quilt made all her careful walls feel suddenly fragile. A rider appeared on the eastern trail, moving fast, and Esther stepped back into the shadows of the porch, one hand instinctively covering the baby's head. Strangers meant trouble, and trouble was something she could not afford. The rider slowed as he approached, raising one hand in a peaceful gesture, and when he pulled up at the hitching post, Esther recognized him from town. Amos Garrett, the man who had spent 2 years in Yuma prison for riding with the Ketchum gang, and now worked breaking horses for the /M ranch. The man everyone said had gone straight, but nobody fully trusted. He swung down from the saddle, his blue eyes taking in the bundle in her arms with a flicker of surprise.
"Miss Prescott, I heard you might need help."
His voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that did not waste words.
"I do not need help from an ex-outlaw."
She kept her chin up, even as exhaustion made her sway slightly. The baby stirred, whimpering, and Esther rocked her gently, her inexperience showing in the stiff way she held the small body.
"That baby needs milk, and you need supplies. Storm's coming in tonight, big one, and the trail to town will be impassable by morning. I can ride out now, get what you need, be back before the snow hits hard."
"Why would you do that?"
"Because it is the right thing to do."
He said it simply, without pride or false modesty, and something in his directness made Esther hesitate. She had been alone for so long, managing everything herself, trusting no one. But the baby's cry grew louder, and panic fluttered in her chest.
"I have no money to pay you."
Did not ask for any.
He turned back to his horse, checking the saddle rigging, and Esther felt a strange tug of something she could not name.
"Fine. I need milk, cloth for diapers, a bottle if the general store has one."
She rattled off the list, her voice clipped and businesslike, a shield against the vulnerability of needing anyone. Amos nodded, swung back into the saddle, and rode out without another word, his duster flaring behind him as the wind picked up. Esther watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then looked down at the baby, whose dark eyes blinked up at her with perfect trust.
"What am I supposed to do with you?"
She whispered it, but the baby just yawned, and Esther carried her inside, laying her carefully on the sofa cushion surrounded by rolled blankets to keep her from rolling off. The ranch house felt too quiet, too empty, and Esther paced the front room, glancing out the window every few minutes as the sky darkened and the first fat snowflakes began to fall. The blizzard hit faster than anyone expected, wind howling around the corners of the house and snow piling against the windows in drifts that climbed higher with every hour. Esther fed the baby sugar water with a clean cloth dipped in a cup, a trick her mother had taught her years ago, and prayed it would be enough until Amos returned. If he returned. The thought made her throat tighten, because men died in storms like this, froze to death within 100 yards of shelter, and she barely knew him, had no claim on him, no right to feel this creeping dread. She told herself it was only worry for the supplies, for the baby's sake. But when the door burst open near midnight, and Amos stumbled in covered in snow, she felt relief crash over her so hard she nearly dropped the baby.
Got everything.
He kicked the door shut against the wind, his face red from cold, ice crusted in his dark hair, where his hat had blown off somewhere on the trail. He set the saddlebags on the table, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled out a glass bottle, a tin of condensed milk, soft cloth, a small blanket, even a tiny knitted cap.
You could have died out there.
Her voice came out sharper than she intended, fear disguised as anger.
But I did not.
He met her eyes, and she saw something there, a quiet strength that did not need to prove itself.
Thank you.
She forced the words out, and he nodded once, then moved to the stove to warm his hands. Esther mixed the milk according to the instructions he had gotten from the store owner's wife, testing the temperature on her wrist the way her mother used to. And when she offered the bottle to the baby, the little girl latched on eagerly, sucking with desperate hunger that made Esther's eyes sting. Amos watched from across the room, his expression unreadable. And when the baby finally fell asleep, milk-drunk and content, he spoke quietly.
She is lucky you found her.
She found me.
Esther laid the baby in a wooden crate lined with a new blanket, a makeshift cradle, and straightened slowly, her back aching from hours of tension.
You should stay until the storm passes. The bunkhouse is not fit, but there is a spare room.
I will take the chair by the fire.
He said it firmly, and Esther did not argue, too exhausted to fight, and too aware of how improper it was to have him here, how the town would talk if anyone knew. But propriety seemed a distant concern when survival was the only thing that mattered. She brought him a blanket and a pillow, their fingers brushing as he took them, and the contact sent a jolt through her that she quickly suppressed.
Good night, Mr. Garrett.
Amos.
He said it softly, and she nodded, retreating to her room where she lay awake, listening to the wind scream and the baby's soft breathing, and the creak of the chair as Amos settled in by the dying fire. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, but he had ridden through a blizzard for a stranger's child, and that meant something, even if she did not yet know what. The storm raged for 3 days, snow piling so high that the windows on the north side were completely blocked, and Esther and Amos fell into a strange rhythm of shared survival. He kept the fire going, shoveled paths to the barn to tend the horses, fixed a broken shutter that had been banging for months. She cooked what little they had, cared for the baby who she had started calling Hope in her mind, though she knew she should not name her, should not get attached, because surely someone would come to claim her. They spoke little, but the silences were not uncomfortable, and Esther found herself watching him when he thought she was not looking, noticing the careful way he moved, the quiet competence in everything he did, the sadness that sometimes crossed his face when he stared into the fire. On the third night, as the wind finally began to die down, Esther sat across from him at the table, Hope asleep in her arms, and asked the question that had been building.
Why did you really come here?
Amos looked up from the harness he was mending, his blue eyes steady.
Because I heard Rathbone Ashford was asking questions about your ranch in town.
The name sent ice through Esther's veins. Rathbone Ashford, the new brand inspector, a man with cold eyes and a soft voice who smiled when he accused ranchers of rustling and used forged deeds to take their land when they could not prove ownership. 3 families had lost everything in the past 6 months, driven out or arrested on trumped-up charges. And the railroad route that everyone knew was coming somehow always ended up crossing land Ashford had just acquired.
What kind of questions?
About your brother. About how long you have been running the place alone. About the mortgage.
Amos set down the harness, his jaw tight.
He is looking for weakness, for a way in, and a woman alone with a baby is exactly what he wants.
I am not alone.
She said it automatically, defensively, and Amos's expression softened slightly.
No. You are not.
The words hung between them, a promise neither had spoken aloud, but both understood. Esther felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the armor she had built so carefully, and she looked down at Hope to avoid his gaze.
You do not owe me anything.
Maybe not, but I owe myself the chance to be better than I was.
His honesty was like a blade, cutting through all her defenses, and when she finally looked up, she saw the same vulnerability in his eyes that she felt in her own heart.
What did you do? Before?
Rode with men who took what they wanted and called it justice. Robbed stages, rustled cattle, thought we were fighting back against the railroad and the land grabbers.
He paused, his voice going quieter.
Until a driver got shot and bled out in the dirt because we were too stupid to know when to quit. I turned myself in the next day, served my time, and when I got out, I swore I would never take another thing that was not mine to take.
And you have kept that promise.
Every day.
The simplicity of it, the steady determination, made Esther's throat tighten. She had judged him without knowing him, assumed his past defined his future. But here he was, proving her wrong with every quiet action.
Ashford will not stop. He wants this land for the railroad route, and he will find a way to take it.
Not if we stop him first.
Amos leaned back, his expression turning calculating.
I know his weakness. When I was in Yuma, there was a man in the cell next to mine, a forger named Tibbs, who did work for Ashford before he got caught. He told me Ashford keeps a lockbox with all the original documents he uses to create the forgeries. Insurance, in case someone tries to double-cross him. If we can find that box, we can prove what he has been doing.
Where is it?
Tibbs said Ashford keeps it in his office in town, hidden in a floor safe under the desk.
Then we get it.
She said it firmly, as if it were simple, and Amos shook his head slowly.
It is not that easy. Ashford is smart, careful. If we go after that box and fail, he will bury us both.
And if we do nothing, he takes the ranch anyway, and I lose everything.
She stood, still holding Hope, her hazel eyes blazing with a determination that matched his own.
I would rather fight and lose than hand it over without trying.
All right.
He stood as well, and they faced each other across the table. 2 people with everything to lose, and only each other to trust.
But we do this smart, and we do it together.
Esther nodded, and for the first time in 5 years, she felt something other than loneliness. She felt hope. The storm cleared the next morning, leaving the world buried in white and glittering under a pale sun. Amos shoveled a path to the barn while Esther fed Hope and changed her diaper with the new cloth, her hands growing steadier with practice. When he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, he found her packing supplies into a leather satchel.
What are you doing?
Getting ready. If we are going to town, we need to leave soon before another storm moves in.
You are not going to town. You are staying here with the baby.
This is my ranch, my fight. I am going.
She turned to face him, her jaw set in a way that told him argument was useless. Amos sighed, running a hand through his dark hair.
Then, we need someone to watch Hope.
Mrs. Callahan at the boarding house. She has 6 children of her own. She will know what to do.
It was not ideal, leaving the baby with a near stranger, but Esther had no other choice, and the determined set of her shoulders told Amos she had already made up her mind. They rode into town that afternoon, Hope bundled in blankets and tucked into a small basket that Esther carried on her saddle. The town of Coyote Gulch was small, just a main street with a scattering of false front buildings and a new brick courthouse at the far end where the territorial judge had taken up residence before vanishing 2 weeks ago, under circumstances nobody would discuss. Esther felt eyes on them as they rode past the general store and the saloon, felt the weight of judgment and speculation, because a woman riding alone with an ex-outlaw and a baby was the kind of scandal that fed gossip for months. She kept her head high, refusing to show shame for something that was innocent, and Amos rode close enough that their stirrups almost touched, a silent statement of solidarity. They left Hope with Mrs. Callahan, a round-faced woman with kind eyes who took the baby without questions and promised to keep her safe and fed. Esther hesitated at the door, her heart aching at the separation, and Mrs. Callahan smiled gently. The older woman said they should go do what needed doing, that Hope would be fine, and Esther forced herself to leave before the tears could fall. Ashford's office was in a narrow building next to the land office, a place that smelled of ink and old paper and something darker that Esther could not name. They waited until late afternoon when the streets were quiet, most folks inside avoiding the cold, and Amos picked the lock on the back door with a skill that reminded Esther exactly what he used to be. Inside, the office was neat and orderly. Shelves lined with ledgers and files, a heavy desk dominating the center of the room. Amos moved to the desk, kneeling to examine the floor underneath, and Esther kept watch at the window, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst.
Found it.
He pulled back a small rug to reveal a section of floorboard that lifted away, and beneath it was a squat iron safe with a combination lock. Amos swore under his breath.
Tibbs did not mention a combination.
Can you open it?
Maybe, if I had an hour and a lot of luck.
He pulled tools from his coat pocket, delicate picks and a small listening device, and began working the lock with a concentration that made his jaw tight. Esther watched the street, her nerves stretched thin, and then she saw movement at the far end. A tall figure in a black coat and flat-brimmed hat walking toward the office with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned everything he touched.
Amos, he is coming.
How close?
Half a block.
Not enough time.
Amos shoved the tools back into his pocket and lowered the floorboard, replacing the rug quickly.
We need to leave. Now.
They slipped out the back door just as the front door opened, Ashford's voice calling out to someone on the street, smooth and cultured and cold. Esther and Amos pressed against the alley wall, barely breathing, as footsteps moved through the office above them, and then faded. They waited until full dark before moving, keeping to the shadows, and did not speak until they were back at the boarding house collecting Hope. Mrs. Callahan handed the baby over with a knowing look, but asked no questions, and Esther tucked Hope against her chest, feeling the steady beat of the tiny heart and the weight of failure pressing down. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the temperature dropping fast. And when they finally reached the house, Esther carried Hope inside and laid her in the makeshift cradle, then sank into a chair and put her face in her hands.
We failed.
We tried. That is not nothing.
Amos crouched beside her chair, his voice gentle.
We will find another way.
There is no other way. Without proof, Ashford can do whatever he wants, and no one will stop him.
She looked up, and he saw the tears she had been holding back all day, finally spilling over.
I am going to lose everything, just like my parents, just like everyone else he has destroyed.
No.
He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him.
I will not let that happen.
You cannot promise that.
I just did.
He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the arm of the chair, and the contact was warm and solid and real.
Why do you care so much?
Because you matter.
The words were simple, unadorned, and they broke something open inside Esther that had been locked away for so long she had forgotten it existed. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his, and for a moment, they just sat there. Two damaged people holding on to each other in the darkness. Then Hope cried, and the moment passed, but the connection remained, a fragile thread of trust that neither was ready to name, but both could feel. The next week passed in a strange kind of peace. Amos stayed at the ranch, sleeping in the spare room now instead of the chair, and helped Esther with the daily work that never ended. They fell into a rhythm, easy and natural, and Esther found herself laughing at his dry comments about the stubborn mare who refused to be shod, and the chickens who had decided the porch was their new roost. Hope grew stronger, her cries louder and more demanding, and Esther's confidence grew with her. She no longer panicked when the baby fussed, no longer felt like she was failing at every turn, and she knew it was because Amos was there, steady and calm and utterly reliable. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the high desert, Amos spoke quietly.
Ashford came by the /M yesterday, asking about me.
What did he want?
To know if I was still working there, where I was spending my time.
He paused, his expression grim.
He knows we were in his office.
How?
Someone saw us, or he is just smart enough to put it together. Either way, he is going to make a move soon.
Esther felt fear coil in her stomach, but also something else, something fierce and protective.
Then we make our move first.
With what proof? We could not get into the safe.
Maybe we do not need the safe. Maybe we need Ashford himself.
She stood, pacing the porch, her mind racing.
What if we make him think we have the proof, that we found the lockbox, and we are going to the new territorial judge?
The judge disappeared 2 weeks ago.
Ashford does not know that we know that. If he thinks the judge is still around and we are bringing evidence, he might panic, might make a mistake.
Or he might just kill us.
Amos said it bluntly, and Esther stopped pacing, looking at him.
Do you have a better idea?
He did not, and they both knew it. The plan was dangerous, reckless, built on assumptions and hope, but it was all they had. Amos stood, moving to stand beside her at the porch rail, and they looked out over the land that Esther's family had fought to keep, the land that meant everything.
If we do this, there is no going back.
I know.
And if it goes wrong, Ashford will take the ranch, and we will both end up dead or in prison.
I know that too.
She turned to face him, and in the fading light his blue eyes were dark and serious.
But I would rather fight with you than give up alone.
All right then.
He said it quietly, and then he did something that surprised them both. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of her dark auburn hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek, and Esther's breath caught.
For what it is worth, I am glad I rode out here that first day.
So am I.
The words were barely a whisper, and then hope cried from inside, breaking the moment. But the feeling remained, warm and fragile and terrifyingly real. They set the plan in motion the next morning, spreading word through the few people Esther trusted that they had found evidence against Ashford, and were meeting with the territorial judge at the courthouse at noon. The risk was enormous, but calculated. If Ashford believed the judge was still in town and active, he would have to act fast to stop them. And in acting, he would reveal himself. They arrived at the courthouse early, positioning themselves in the main hall where they could watch both entrances. Esther carried Hope in the basket, using the baby as cover for the derringer tucked into her skirt pocket, a small weapon her father had given her mother years ago. Amos stood near the door, his hand resting casually near the Colt revolver on his hip, every line of his body radiating controlled readiness. They waited, tension coiling tighter with every minute, and then the door opened and Rathbone Ashford walked in. Flanked by two men Esther recognized as deputies he had bought with land and promises. Ashford was tall and lean, his face handsome in a cold way, his movements precise and controlled. He smiled when he saw them, a smile that never reached his pale gray eyes. The brand inspector said good morning, his voice smooth and pleasant, and asked what brought them to the courthouse on such a fine day. Esther stood, holding Hope close, and replied that they had business with the judge. Ashford's smile widened slightly, a predator scenting weakness, and he said that was unfortunate, as the judge had left town on business and would not return for some time. Amos spoke then, his tone flat and unimpressed, saying they would wait. Ashford studied him for a long moment, his expression never changing, and then he gestured to the deputies. The brand inspector said they were both under arrest for trespassing in his office and attempted theft. Esther's heart slammed against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady, asking on what evidence. Ashford reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document, holding it up like a trophy, and said he had a witness who saw them breaking into his building. And more importantly, he had this. He unfolded the paper, and Esther saw it was a marriage certificate, dated 3 months ago, bearing her signature and the signature of a man named Thomas Hale, a drifter who had worked at the ranch for 2 weeks before her brother fired him for stealing. The certificate was a forgery, crude but legal-looking enough, and Ashford explained with false sympathy that according to territorial law, Hale now had claim to half the ranch, and conveniently, Hale had signed over his rights to Ashford in exchange for settling a debt. Esther felt the ground drop out from under her, the sheer audacity of the lie taking her breath away. And Ashford continued, saying that as a married woman, she had no legal standing to challenge the transfer, and her arrest for theft would only strengthen his case.
That is a lie, and you know it.
Amos took a step forward, his hand moving toward his revolver, but the deputies drew faster, their weapons aimed at his chest. Ashford raised a hand, his voice still calm, telling them there was no need for violence, that this was a simple legal matter, and if they cooperated, no harm would come to them or the child. Esther saw the calculation in Ashford's eyes, the certainty that he had won. And something cold and sharp settled in her chest, a refusal to surrender. She stepped between Amos and the deputies, her voice clear and unwavering, saying that the certificate was a forgery and that she had never seen Thomas Hale again after her brother dismissed him. Ashford shrugged, saying that would be for a court to decide, and in the meantime, the ranch would be held in trust pending resolution. Under his supervision, of course. The moment hung, suspended, and then Amos spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife.
You made a mistake, Ashford. Thomas Hale is dead. Died in a saloon fight in Amarillo 6 weeks ago. I was there. So was the sheriff. Your witness is either lying or confused, and your forged certificate is worthless because a dead man cannot sign over property rights.
Ashford's expression did not change, but Esther saw his jaw tighten, the first crack in his composure. The brand inspector said that was an unfortunate coincidence, but it did not change the validity of the marriage contract, which predated Hale's death. Amos smiled then, a cold, dangerous expression, and replied that it did change things, because the territorial statutes required a 6-month waiting period before a widow could transfer property, and Ashford's deed was dated only 4 weeks after Hale's death, making the entire transaction illegal. Ashford's pale eyes narrowed, and for the first time, his voice rose slightly, a sharp edge creeping in. The brand inspector said that was a technicality, easily resolved, and that Amos had no proof of when the deed was actually signed.
I have proof. The original deed, witnessed and dated, locked in the land office safe in Amarillo. I sent a wire last night. The territorial marshal is on his way with it now.
Esther's breath caught, hope flaring bright and sudden, and she saw Ashford's mask slip completely, rage flashing in his pale eyes before he controlled it. The brand inspector turned to the deputies, his voice dropping back to its normal smooth tone, and ordered them to arrest both of them immediately on charges of conspiracy and fraud. The deputies hesitated, glancing at each other, and Ashford's voice cracked like a whip, repeating the order. One deputy stepped forward, reaching for Esther's arm, and Amos moved faster than she thought possible, his fist connecting with the man's jaw and sending him sprawling. The second deputy swung his revolver toward Amos, and Esther screamed, clutching Hope tighter, but the shot never came, because the courthouse door slammed open and the sheriff walked in, flanked by 2 men wearing marshal's badges. The sheriff announced in a loud voice that he was taking Rathbone Ashford into custody on charges of fraud, forgery, extortion, and conspiracy to defraud the territorial government. One of the marshals stepped forward, holding up a leather document case, and explained that the land office in Amarillo had been conducting an investigation into suspicious property transfers across 3 counties, and Ashford's name had appeared on over 40 questionable deeds in the past year. The marshal said they had evidence of forged signatures, bribed officials, and intimidation of witnesses, and that the territorial governor had issued a warrant for Ashford's arrest. Ashford stood very still, his face pale and blank, and then he lunged toward the door, his hand reaching for a hidden derringer. Amos caught him by the collar and slammed him back against the wall, the derringer clattering to the floor, and the marshals moved in, snapping iron cuffs around Ashford's wrists. The brand inspector did not struggle, did not shout, did not plead. He simply stared at Amos with cold, empty eyes and said in a flat voice that this was not over, that he had friends in high places, and that Amos would regret crossing him. Amos leaned close, his voice low and hard.
You are done. And if you ever come near her, or her ranch again. Friends will not save you.
The marshals led Ashford out, the deputies following with their heads down, and the courthouse fell silent, except for the sound of Hope fussing softly in Esther's arms. The sheriff approached, his expression apologetic, and explained that the judge had not disappeared. He had been working with the marshals to gather evidence, and Amos's wire last night had provided the final piece they needed. Esther looked at Amos, her heart pounding, and asked how he had known about the deed and the waiting period. Amos met her eyes, his expression serious, and said he had spent the last 2 weeks in Amarillo, talking to lawyers and land clerks, piecing together Ashford's operation, because he knew the only way to stop a man like that was to beat him at his own game.
You did this for me.
I did this because it was right, and because I was not going to let him take your home.
Esther felt tears sting her eyes, gratitude, and something deeper welling up inside her. And she reached out, her hand finding his. The sheriff cleared his throat, saying he would need statements from both of them. But that could wait until tomorrow. And in the meantime, they were free to go. Amos nodded, his hand tightening around hers, and together they walked out of the courthouse into the bright late spring morning, Hope sleeping peacefully against Esther's shoulder. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the tension of the past weeks slowly draining away, replaced by a fragile, tentative peace. Esther watched the high desert landscape roll past, wildflowers blooming in vivid splashes of color. And she thought about everything that had happened, about the baby left on her doorstep, about Amos riding through a storm to save her cattle, about his quiet strength and unwavering principles. She thought about trust, how hard it had been to let herself believe in someone again, and how Amos had earned it without asking, step by careful step. When they reached the ranch, Esther handed Hope to Amos and went inside to prepare a late breakfast, her hands moving automatically through familiar tasks while her mind raced. She heard Amos's boots on the porch, the creak of the door, and then he was there in the kitchen doorway, Hope still sleeping in his arms, his eyes serious and intent.
Esther, I need to say something.
She turned, flour dusting her hands, her heart beating fast.
All right.
I came here looking for a fresh start, a chance to prove I could be more than my past. I did not expect to find you, or Hope, or any of this. But I have, and I am not walking away. If you will have me, I want to stay, not as a hired hand, as your partner, your husband, if you will let me.
Esther's breath caught, emotions flooding through her, joy and fear and hope, all tangled together. She looked at him, at the man who had ridden through a blizzard for her, who had fought for her home, who had proven his worth in 100 quiet ways, and she felt the last of her walls crumble.
Yes.
The word came out soft, but certain, and Amos's face lit with a smile that transformed him, warm and open and full of relief. He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, careful not to wake Hope, and kissed her gently, a promise and a beginning. When they pulled apart, Esther was smiling, tears slipping down her cheeks, and Amos wiped them away with his free hand, his touch gentle.
After the spring roundup, we will make it official. Simple and soon. Just us and the preacher, and whoever wants to come.
That sounds perfect.
They stood there in the kitchen, flour on her hands and a sleeping baby between them. And Esther felt something settle deep in her chest, a sense of rightness and certainty she had not felt in years. The next weeks passed in a blur of preparation and hard work. The spring roundup came, and Amos rode out with the hands Esther hired, proving himself capable and steady, earning their respect through skill and fairness. Esther managed the books and the logistics, Hope strapped to her back in a sling one of the ranch women had made. And together, they built something stronger than either could have managed alone. The cattle were counted and branded, the calves healthy and strong. And when the final tallies came in, Esther realized they had not just survived, they had thrived. The railroad paid top dollar for the beef, and the ranch accounts showed a profit for the first time in 2 years. Word spread through Coyote Gulch about Ashford's arrest and the marshal's investigation, and other ranchers came forward with their own stories of threats and forged documents. The territorial judge returned and convened a special court, and Ashford was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison. His assets seized and sold to compensate his victims. Esther received a letter from the judge's office, informing her that her property deed had been cleared of all encumbrances, and that she was the sole legal owner of the ranch. She read the letter twice, relief and triumph washing through her, and then she folded it carefully and placed it in the strongbox where her brother's will was kept. On a warm evening in late spring, with the roundup complete and the cattle sold, Esther and Amos stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the high desert. Hope was inside, sleeping in the cradle Amos had built, and the evening air was soft and sweet, scented with wildflowers and sage. Amos took Esther's hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, and said they should pick a date. Esther leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and suggested the following Saturday, simple and soon, just like they had planned. Amos agreed, his voice warm with contentment, and they stood together in the fading light, the future stretching out before them, full of promise and possibility. The wedding took place the following Saturday in the small church in Coyote Gulch, with half the town in attendance, and the preacher beaming as he pronounced them husband and wife. Esther wore a simple blue dress she had made herself, with wildflowers in her hair, and Amos wore his best shirt and a new hat he had bought in town. Hope was there, held by one of the ranch women, gurgling happily through the ceremony. And when Amos kissed his bride, the church erupted in cheers and applause. Afterward, there was a celebration at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food brought by neighbors, music and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. Esther danced with Amos under the open sky, his arms strong and sure around her, and she felt a happiness so complete it took her breath away. When the guests finally departed and the house grew quiet, Esther and Amos sat together in the kitchen, Hope asleep upstairs, the remnants of the celebration scattered around them. Amos pulled Esther into his lap, his arms wrapping around her waist, and she rested her forehead against his, smiling.
We did it. We made it through.
We did. And we will keep making it through, whatever comes. Together.
Esther kissed him, slow and deep, tasting joy and promise and forever. And when they pulled apart, she saw her future reflected in his eyes, clear and certain and real. They sat there in the kitchen, flour still dusting the counter from the morning's baking, the house settling around them with familiar creaks and sighs. And Esther knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had been searching for all along. A partner, a home, a love worth fighting for. The days that followed were filled with the steady rhythm of ranch work, mornings starting early and evenings ending late. But now there was a lightness to it, a shared purpose that made every task easier. Amos proved to be not just a capable partner, but a thoughtful one, anticipating problems before they arose, and working alongside Esther with an easy collaboration that felt natural and right. Hope grew stronger every day, her smile bright and frequent, and Esther marveled at how quickly she had become the center of their small family. One evening, as they sat together on the porch after supper, Hope playing on a blanket at their feet, Esther asked Amos if he ever regretted leaving his old life behind. Amos was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant, and then he shook his head.
No. That life was all I knew, but it was not who I wanted to be. This, here, with you and Hope, this is who I am meant to be.
I am glad you found us.
So am I.
They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Esther felt a deep contentment settle over her, the kind that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The weeks turned into months, and the ranch flourished under their joint stewardship. The cattle thrived, the accounts balanced, and the reputation of the Prescott Ranch, now the Prescott Garrett Ranch, grew strong and solid. Neighbors who had once been wary offered friendship and respect, and Esther found herself part of a community in a way she had never been before. Hope took her first steps in the kitchen on a bright autumn morning, tottering from Esther to Amos with a delighted squeal, and they both laughed, pride and joy mingling as they caught her and swung her between them. That night, as they lay in bed, Amos's arm around her and Hope sleeping soundly in the next room, Esther whispered that she had never imagined this kind of happiness was possible. Amos kissed her forehead, his voice soft in the darkness.
Neither did I. But here we are.
Here we are.
And as sleep claimed them, Esther felt the last lingering shadows of her past fade away, replaced by the warmth and certainty of the life they had built together. A life rooted in trust, forged in hardship, and bound by love that would endure whatever the future held. She held another man's baby while he get to save her ranch. Coyote Gulch, Texas, 1869. Esther Prescott, a railroad clerk turned ranch owner, finds a baby on her doorstep just as a ruthless brand inspector closes in with forged deeds and blackmail. Amos Garrett, an ex-outlaw going straight, is the only man brave enough to ride through danger to protect her. When a secret marriage contract threatens everything, they must outwit a calculating villain before the spring roundup. A story of resilience, trust earned step by step, and a love forged in the Wild West. Subscribe for more authentic frontier romance stories. Wild West Romance, 1869 Texas Frontier, Cowboy Love Story, Ranch Survival, Outlaw Redemption, Historical Western, Found Baby Trope, Enemies to Lovers, Land Grab Conflict, Spring Roundup, Railroad Era Romance, Strong Female Lead, Protective Hero, Frontier Justice, Happily Ever After, Colorized Late 1800s American West Photograph. Natural light, gentle contrast, slightly soft focus, subtle film grain, faint dust/scratches, slight vignetting, no text, no watermark. Woman in her late 20s with chestnut hair and loose bun, green eyes filled with determination and fear, wearing blue cotton work dress and white apron, holding swaddled baby protectively against her chest with both arms, tears visible on her cheeks. Man in his early 30s with dark brown hair, intense blue eyes, strong jawline, wearing tan canvas work coat over chambray shirt, black cowboy hat, reaching toward her with one protective arm, while his other hand rests on his holstered revolver. Expression fierce and protective. They stand close together on ranch house porch during late afternoon storm. Woman leaning into man's protective embrace while he shields both her and baby from approaching danger. Their bodies angled toward camera, but eyes locked on threat in distance. Background shows darkening storm clouds rolling in over high desert prairie. Ranch house door half open behind them. Scattered wildflowers being whipped by wind. Distant mesa silhouettes. Dramatic storm light breaking through clouds in amber shafts. Foreground includes porch railing with climbing vine. Woman's skirt blowing in wind. Midground captures the protective trio frozen in moment of danger. Background layers include corral fence, windmill, approaching storm front, vast prairie, photorealistic cinematic style, shot on cinema camera, natural golden hour lighting, shallow depth of field with soft bokeh background, warm beige and amber color grading. Looks like a film still from a premium Western romance movie. Authentic 1800s period photography aesthetic. Professional portrait photog. Rafi quality / thumbed his weapon. But Ashford raised one hand, his voice remaining calm and pleasant as he told the deputies to stand down. The brand inspector said violence would not be necessary, and he appreciated Amos's restraint. Ashford folded the forged certificate and tucked it back into his coat, then gestured toward the door, saying they were free to leave, for now. But he expected them to vacate the ranch within the week, and if they caused any trouble, he would have them arrested and the child taken into custody by the Terret, Oriole authorities. Esther felt Amos's hand on her elbow, steady and grounding, and she forced herself to nod, to turn and walk out of that building with her head high, even though fury and fear warred inside her chest. They stepped into the spring sunlight, Hope still sleeping peacefully against Esther's shoulder, and Amos said quietly that they needed to move fast. Esther agreed, her mind already racing through options, and Amos said he knew where Thomas Hale was, or at least where he had been headed when he left Coyote Gulch. The drifter had bragged about finding work at a ranch near the New Mexico line, and if they could get to him before Ashford did, they could prove the marriage certificate was a forgery. Esther said it would take 2 days hard riding to reach the New Mexico border, and Amos nodded, saying he would leave within the hour. Esther started to protest, saying she should come with him. But Amos shook his head, his tone firm but gentle.
You need to stay here and protect the ranch. If Ashford thinks we have run, he will move in immediately. I can ride faster alone, and I know how to track a man who does not want to be found. Trust me.
Esther met his eyes, seeing the resolve there, the quiet confidence, and she realized she did trust him, more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. She nodded, swallowing hard, and said to be careful. Amos's expression softened, and he reached out, his hand brushing her cheek for just a moment, before he stepped back.
I will be back before the roundup. I promise.
He mounted his horse and rode out, and Esther stood in the street holding Hope, watching until he disappeared over the ridge, and then she turned and walked back to the ranch, determination settling into her bones like iron. The next 2 days were the longest of her life. She kept the ranch running, kept the hands working, kept Hope fed and safe, and every time she heard hoofbeats, her heart leapt, hoping it was Amos returning. On the third morning, Ashford arrived with his deputies and a wagon load of men, announcing that he was taking possession of the property. Esther met him on the porch, rifle in hand, and told him he was trespassing. Ashford smiled that cold smile and said the law was on his side, and if she resisted, she would be arrested. Esther's hands tightened on the rifle, her pulse hammering, and she was about to reply when she heard it. The sound of hoofbeats coming fast from the east. And she turned to see Amos riding hard. Another man tied and slumped over a second horse beside him. Amos pulled up in a cloud of dust, dismounting in one smooth motion, and hauled Thomas Hale off the horse, the drifter's face bruised and sullen. Amos dragged Hale forward and dropped him at Ashford's feet.
Tell them what you told me.
Hale looked up at Ashford, fear in his eyes, and then he spoke, his voice shaking, saying that Ashford had paid him to sign the marriage certificate, that he had never married Esther, that the whole thing was a fraud. Ashford's face went white, then red, and for the first time, his voice rose, sharp and furious, denying everything, calling Hale a liar. Amos pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it up.
Signed confession, witnessed by the sheriff in Red Rock. And I have the bank records showing the payments Ashford made to Hale and to the forger who made the certificate.
The deputies looked at each other, uncertainty flickering across their faces, and Ashford took a step back, his control crumbling. Esther lowered the rifle, relief flooding through her, and Amos moved to her side, his presence solid and reassuring. The deputies arrested Ashford, ignoring his protests, and loaded him into the wagon along with Hale. The hired guns scattered, wanting no part of a losing fight, and within minutes, the ranch yard was quiet again, dust settling in the morning sun. Esther turned to Amos, words catching in her throat, and he looked down at her, his blue eyes soft and steady.
It is over. You are safe now.
Thank you. I do not know how to repay you.
You do not owe me anything.
But Esther shook her head, stepping closer. Hope nestled between them.
Yes, I do. You risked everything for us. You kept your promise.
Amos reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized had fallen.
I would do it again. For you. For Hope. For this.
And then he kissed her, gentle and sure, and Esther kissed him back, her heart finally free of the fear and doubt that had weighed it down for so long. When they pulled apart, Amos smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded.
So, about that wedding date.
After the roundup. Simple and soon.
Simple and soon. I like that.
They stood together on the porch, the ranch stretching out around them, the future suddenly bright and wide open. And Esther knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she had found her home, not just in this land, but in this man, and he had found his in her.